Hey guys, I finished playing Ghost of Tsushima a few weeks ago, and since then I've been really thinking a lot about this game. First of all, I think this might be the best game that I played this year so far. I just really like it. It's a beautiful game with a great story that actually had me care more for the characters in the game than I did for those in The Last of Us Part 2. I played also Final Fantasy Remake, which was great and all, and I really enjoyed Doom Eternal, but I just really enjoy this type of third-person action game with a solid story, good voice acting, good quality, all of that. The gameplay is a lot of fun, but I think there's a lot of things that I would love to see get improved upon in a sequel. I think a sequel to this game could be an absolute masterpiece if they just build upon and perfect some of the elements of the gameplay. So I thought, why not share my thoughts with you guys and see what you think. So here's my Ghost of Tsushima 2 wishlist. But before I get started, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. This is a really small channel and it just goes a long way towards supporting and helping it grow. Alright, first let's talk about the combat system. The combat system in Ghost of Tsushima revolves around stances, which is a great concept that I just don't think is really well implemented in the game. Or rather, I think the way it's done has some unintended consequences that aren't great. So you probably know exactly how this works, but just in case, I'll go over it real quick. There are different stances, each of them featuring unique light and heavy attacks, as well as a charged heavy attack. I'm not gonna go into every single detail, but that's, basically the entire idea. It's a really cool concept, but it kinda gets sabotaged by the fact that there's a one-to-one relationship where each of these stances is more effective against a specific enemy type. Not because the actual attacks are more effective in terms of their reach, speed and damage, but because there's a modifier making them more or less effective according to a stance enemy matchup. So if you do a heavy attack on a swordsman using the stone stance, that's great, it increases his stagger by quite a bit, but that same attack won't do as much damage to other enemy types. The way the attack actually lands on the enemy doesn't really matter. This means the fastest way of dealing with an enemy is basically switching to the appropriate stance, hitting them with heavy attacks until he's staggered, and then finishing him off with either light attacks or more heavy attacks. Deviating from this can be useful sometimes, but this is pretty much what you want to be doing 99% of the time. So instead of expanding your moveset, the stances are actually limiting your effectiveness and forcing you to use a small subset of your attack repertoire at any given point. I think a much better system would be making each stance affect your speed, reach and damage across the board and have those stances be effective against any enemy, being more or less suited based on the way that those enemies move and attack. I know the stances in the game already offer differences in terms of their speed, range and damage, but they are all affected by an invisible modifier that reduces your damage when hitting an enemy with a wrong stance. So for example, you could have a counter-focused stance that's great for fighting single enemies, in which you get a bigger parry window, reflecting kind of Jin's increased focus and attention to a single enemy's movement and attacks. However, with this stance, you get a reduced dodge, which is basically just a sidestep that just barely avoids an attack and allows you to retaliate quickly. On the flip side, this would make you much more vulnerable from enemies attacking from behind or from the sides. Another stance could be based around wide-ranging attacks, similar to what you get when you hold triangle in the moon stance, allowing you to perform strikes that hit multiple enemies at once, making it ideal for creating space when dealing with several enemies. Once you have used this stance to create some space, you can then switch to a more punishing stance to finish them off. I can think of several other stance ideas, like one that's slow and hard hitting, dealing massive damage, which would be great against brutes, but would also pretty much just one-hit other enemy types. But you could go the exact opposite way and engage brutes with a stance that gives you more mobility and has fast medium damage attacks to quickly just poke in and out and do some damage while staying out of his range. Both styles would work and be effective while providing significant differences, which is the basis of what I'm proposing. Something that is useful and viable at all times and affects your attacks in a tangible way instead of affecting a meter or damage modifier that's in the game code that artificially neuters attacks when they're not used in quote-unquote the right way. Another stance might be really good at defense, allowing you to parry or block otherwise unblockable attacks. You know, maybe it could regenerate your resolve by absorbing enemy attacks or parrying at the right time. There's a huge number of different options here that I think would make the gameplay much more engaging and cool in terms of actual sword fighting, as you could switch stances on the fly against the same enemy without being limited to just the one that happens to be effective. The stagger meter could be kept, but have it tied to damage as well as a whole instead of being its separate own thing. The other change that I'd like to see in terms of combat has to do with special attacks. Right now you pretty much only have the specific charged heavy attacks, Heavenly Strike, and Dance of Wrath. And let's be honest here, Dance of Wrath is just pretty much 3 Heavenly Strikes done fast, so not a lot of variety. I'd love to see a wider range of special attacks in the game. Maybe have one that puts Jin in a defensive position that automatically does a perfect parry when attacked, or one that immediately staggers a single target and leaves him open for a follow-up. Once again, the sky's the limit here and you can pull ideas from any number of different games. You could even have combos that use your other weapons like the bow or the grapple hook, like wrapping the chain around an enemy's leg to drop him off to the ground for a finisher, and you know, stuff like that. It should be pretty clear by now that I think that there are ways to open the combat system wide open and provide a richer and more varied experience while still retaining the core ideas and enemy designs from the game. Let me know what you guys think about these ideas down in the comment section. I'm really interested to know what you guys' thoughts are on this. Now let's talk about stealth and what I believe to be one of the biggest problems with the game, which is the enemy AI. The enemies in this game are all just incredibly dumb, with the two main issues being first, how blind they are to their surroundings, which combined with the really limited patrols that they have set up, have them staring at walls half the time instead of actually guarding, which just makes stealth super easy and thus kind of unrewarding. And second, there's the way that the enemies react once you actually start fighting inside a camp. Instead of the whole site going on alert and converging on your position, you end up engaging small groups one at a time, which just doesn't make any sense. You'll often see Mongols blast their horns in order to raise the alarm, and then just nothing really seems to happen. You still go to another section of the camp and find unalerted enemies there, often just a few meters away, sometimes even in your own line of sight. This obviously shouldn't be the case, so it would be cool to see this changed in the sequel. The stealth being easy is fine. I wouldn't want this game to be based around stealth or anything like that, but there should still be a penalty if you just want to go in guns blazing, or actually, would it be like katana swinging or something? Anyway, I should have to face the entire campsite all at once, which, you know, might be something that you actually want to do. Instead, the way this works right now is you end up having to run across the campsite looking for enemies behind tents that for some reason haven't noticed the screams of his friends being blown up and burnt alive. There's even a challenge remaining enemies prompt, which sometimes pops up and is perhaps the dev's way of acknowledging this and kind of saying, yes, we know this is a problem, but we just couldn't make the AI better. However, you press the prompt and you still have to actively look for the enemies instead of, you know, them finding you. It's just kind of weird. It doesn't really work. The third major change that I'd like to see is in the way that weapon selection works. I'm fine with the way that the stance changes work, but between the ghost weapons and the bows and the thrown distractions and the arrow types, it just gets really messy and difficult to properly select what you want in the midst of a fight. So in order to fix this, first of all, have R2 slow down time all the time, because right now it sometimes doesn't because you're in midair or something and you just hold it and nothing seems to happen. It's really frustrating because you sometimes get hit while trying to do it, and it would just be cool to have a more consistent experience with it. I'd also love to see a simplified weapon selection system. For starters, there shouldn't be a difference between the heavy bow and short bow if you're going to have different ammunition for them. You could just select the ammunition and have Jin grab the proper bow for it. A traditional weapon wheel might actually be all that's really needed here, with time slowing down to a halt while you use it. As it is right now, it's just way too convoluted and difficult to memorize. Even near the end of the game, I was still floundering with the controls more often than I'd like, so yeah, I'd love to see that changed. The last thing that I'll talk about is Jin. I think Jin as a character is alright, but he's kind of lacking a lot in the personality department. Despite him being a kind of muted and unemotional guy, I still managed to get invested in the decisions that he makes in the game and the stuff he goes through, and I was actually interested in his story, which I think speaks very well of the writing in this game. However, if I had to actually describe what Jin is like as a person, I just don't think I could. Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn is resourceful and optimistic and has a personality that really comes across during the game. Geralt is perhaps my favorite character ever in a video game, and Jin is just kinda Jin. So I hope if or when a sequel is made, we get to know him a little better, not through the story, but by nuances like better voice acting or just small quirks and mannerisms. One of my favorite stuff regarding Jin in the game is actually the mission ending screens where he's just resting or messing with the horse and stuff like that. Those scenes are really only relegated to the mission ending screen, and you just don't get anything like that anywhere else in the game. It's kind of a missed opportunity, I think. Well, alright guys, that will be all for now. What do you guys think? Do you think the combat system would be better with those changes, or is it fine the way it is? Please just let me know down in the comment sections. I'm always interested to hear what you guys think. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.